out over 60 Arabic linguists, 300 linguists in total. 60 of them have been Arabic linguists, and we have had dire warnings by every government agency and Congress saying we need more Arabic speakers. We need people who can translate what the people who want to hurt Americans are saying, as well as translate what people who we're trying to win over in the population in the Arab countries where we're fighting. And both of those rely absolutely on the critical specialists of Arabic linguists like Lieutenant Dan Choi, a West Point graduate and combat veteran, who has been told he will be discharged under the Obama administration. He's fighting it, and he's just one among many. Every last person in the military is a valued contributor to those missions. And these critical specialists, the idea that they're just dispensable because of something that has no bearing on military capability, it's a very unwise way of crafting public policy and national security policy. It's illogical.
Cleve Jones, as you organized for the October 11th March in Washington, you're organizing on military bases. Talk about the people you meet and their rights or lack of rights.
I've visited with military personnel from a number of bases in California and Hawaii, and you know, it's very poignant. You meet these brave young men and women who are putting their lives on the line. Some of the young people I met were getting ready for their third tour of duty in Iraq or Afghanistan, and it's so hypocritical, and many of them are in this sort of odd limbo where they are really out. You know, the other members, the people they work with, their colleagues, know that they're gay. Their commanding officers know that they're gay. They're turning a blind eye to it. I was particularly struck during a visit to Honolulu, where at a town hall meeting, a young sailor spoke about his partner and his fear that he would lose his life in combat and that there would be no survivor benefits for his partner. So I think it's an incredibly cruel policy. It's foolish. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I'm glad that there's as much focus on this. I'm working closely with Lieutenant Choi on this March organizing process. And he's a really inspiring young man. I think any parent would be proud to claim him, and I think any country should be eager to honor him and his service.
Clifford Alexander, is there organizing, are you involved in organizing in the leadership of the military past and present to take on this policy of don't ask, don't tell that has led to what, the firings of something like 13,000 service members since it was put in place?
I would emphasize to you, yes, I've been on some lists of groups that have wanted to eliminate this policy for some time, but it is extraordinarily important, I think, to understand that you don't take a poll of generals to decide whether it's a policy or not a policy. We have something in our country called civilian control. So those who are in the executive branch and the legislative branch have control over this policy, and it should not be determined by, I saw the other day, a group of flag officers who thought this was a bad policy with no evidence, because there isn't any evidence. It is up to, in the kind of society we have, civilians to set this policy and to see to it that it is changed. I think that it requires the kind of heated light that I think is being placed on this issue at the present time. And the more of that from as many sources as possible, I think the better. But I don't think that we need to take a poll of the military. I don't think we need to study it anymore. We need to urgently speak out and do whatever we can.
Nathaniel, talk about how someone is fired.
When it comes to the attention of a commander that someone may have engaged in homosexual conduct, which is in a sense a euphemism for being gay, because it's cast as though this is only focusing on behavior and whether you've done something wrong. But in fact, if you simply say you're gay, or worse, if an email is read, if a letter is read, if your phone calls are tapped, if a third party calls and basically tells on you, then you are considered to be in violation of the homosexual conduct policy, even though you haven't engaged in any conduct. And so if the commander deems it to be credible evidence, the commander will either investigate by launching an investigation or sending a letter saying, you know, it's come to our attention that you have engaged in prohibited conduct, and you can decide to either go before a board and present evidence that you don't have a propensity to engage in homosexual conduct, which is sort of the bar, or you can decide to go willingly, which some people do because they're concerned that they might, in an investigation, dredge up some information that would cause the discharge to be dishonorable, whereas in most cases it's an honorable discharge. I do think what Cleve Jones mentioned about the harrowing experiences of the estimated 65,000 service members who are currently in uniform really shouldn't be lost. And it's, you know, yes, it's things like benefits. It's also the idea that your partner could lose his or her life and you would never be notified, and that you can't be in touch with people, and that the service members themselves aren't involved in the best readiness for going to combat because they can't put their paperwork in order. I've spoken to people who had to change the name Brian to Brianne by adding an E so that they could chalk up the difference to a legal error if they needed to claim the paperwork, but that they would be hiding the gender of their partners. So, and one final matter about the generals, there is this list of 1,000 generals that have said, again, as Secretary Alexander said, with no new evidence, no research, they have simply expressed their anti-gay sentiment. Many of them, most of them, didn't serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. They are from a different world. They served many, many, many years ago, and this is a religious right tool that organized this to simply express the homophobia of years past. Today, General John Shalikashvili has an op-ed in the Washington Post, a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and both Colin Powell's predecessor and successor as in that position have now called looking at all the evidence for a repeal and an end to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and Shalikashvili writes that in today's Washington Post. So there is some debate among military people.
Nathaniel Frank, what should the policy be?
Appropriate. It should be a policy of non-discrimination, which is what the Military Readiness Enhancement Act that's currently pending in Congress says. It would repeal the current policy that requires discharge for conduct, and it requires that you not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. It's quite simple.
On this day that we lead into Father's Day, I wanted to go back to your daughter, Secretary Alexander. I wanted to turn to a portion of the poem that she read, poet Elizabeth Alexander. She read her poem at Barack Obama's presidential inauguration. She called it Praise Song for the Day.
Some live by love thy neighbor as thyself. Others by first do no harm or take no more than you need. What if the mightiest word is love? Love beyond marital, filial, national. Love that casts a widening pool of light.
And with that, we end today's broadcast. That was Elizabeth Alexander reading her poem at the inauguration of President Barack Obama. That does it for our show. I want to thank Cleve Jones, organizing the October 11th March on Washington on October 11th. I want to thank Nathaniel Frank, joining us from Chicago on Friendly Fire, How the Gay Ban Undermines the Military and Weakens America, and the former Secretary of the Army under President Carter, Clifford Alexander, the first African-American Secretary of the Army as well, speaking out against the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Berkshire, Huda Kadu, Sarah Mate, Angela Comet, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Massoud, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Peter Curry, our engineers. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.